Two words changed everything. She's different. Not because of a stat line, not because of a highlight reel, because of who said it, and how rarely he says anything at all. Picture this for a second. A man who has watched basketball at its absolute peak for 4 decades, who has seen every kind of dominance the sport can produce, who has been offered a microphone 1,000 times and turned it down 900 of those times, stops mid-conversation and can't find a bigger compliment than that. Two words. No stat attached. No qualifier. Just a fact, stated plainly, the way you'd mention the weather. That's the moment we're starting with today, because right now, across generations, across eras that had almost nothing in common with each other stylistically, physically, or culturally, the same thing is happening over and over again. The people who never talk are talking, and they're all circling the same two names from completely different directions, arriving at strangely similar conclusions. Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham. Two completely different players, two completely different paths into this league, two completely different relationships with the spotlight, and somehow, one shared gravity pulling everyone's attention toward Indiana. This isn't a highlight package. This isn't a stat dump dressed up as a story. This is the story of how two women walked into a league that, by almost every honest account, wasn't fully built for the moment they were about to create. And instead of waiting for the league to catch up to them, they forced it to catch up in real time, on a timeline nobody in the front offices had planned for. Let's slow down and actually look at what's being said, because the specific details matter more than the general noise around them. It's easy to hear legends are talking about her, and let that wash over you as a vague compliment. It's more interesting and more revealing to look at exactly what each of them is choosing to notice. Start with Jordan, because he sets the tone for everything that follows. When someone like Michael Jordan chooses to speak about the women's game, it isn't a scheduled interview slot. It isn't a sponsored appearance squeezed between commercial breaks. It's not something his team drafted for him to read off a card. Jordan has spent decades building an entire public identity around saying almost nothing publicly, guarding his opinions like they're worth something, because they are. So when he does open his mouth about a specific player, people don't just listen politely and move on. They lean in. They rewind the clip. They ask each other, wait, did he actually say that? And what's been widely reported, what keeps resurfacing whenever Jordan's name comes up alongside Caitlin Clark's, isn't a word like talent. It's a word like presence. The distinction matters more than it might seem to on the surface. Some players, even great ones, need time. They need a season, sometimes two, to grow into the size of the spotlight in front of them. They shrink a little at first, then slowly expand into the moment. What's being described about Clark is the opposite of that process entirely. She didn't need the runway. She walked in already at altitude. That's a fundamentally different kind of observation than simply saying she's good. Good is common enough at this level of competition. Everyone on that floor was the best player on every team they've ever played for, going back to middle school. What's being described here is rarer than good. It's command of a room before the room has even fully registered that it's being commanded. It's the kind of thing coaches spend entire careers trying to teach players and mostly fail, because it isn't really teachable in the traditional sense. It's closer to instinct. And then there's Sophie, standing in a very different kind of spotlight, or more accurately, standing slightly outside of it by design and by temperament. She doesn't headline the same conversations Clark does. Her name doesn't trend after every single game the way Clark's does. And by most accounts from people who know her, that's never actually bothered her, which tells you something about her on its own. What people who watch closely, the ones who study film rather than highlight reels, keep coming back to when they talk about Sophie isn't flash. It's force. It's the way she treats every single possession, even the unglamorous ones in the third quarter of a game that's already decided, like it's personal, like something is on the line every single time down the floor. She does the parts of the game that never trend on social media, but consistently show up in win columns. The box out that doesn't result in a highlight. The closeout that forces a bad shot instead of a great one. The screen that springs someone else open while she gets zero credit for it. If Clark is the storm everyone sees coming from a mile away, the one that makes the local news the night before it arrives, Cunningham is the one who's already inside the storm, working long before most people even notice the sky has changed color. Now bring Larry Bird into this, because his name entering the conversation carries a very specific kind of weight that's different from Jordan's. Bird did not build his legacy on sentiment. He built it, brick by brick, on precision, on a kind of basketball intelligence sharpened over years into something close to a weapon. He wasn't the most athletic player on the floor most nights. He didn't need to be. He read the game faster than the game could develop, which is its own form of dominance. Reports and accounts from people around him during Clark's college run describe him watching far more Iowa basketball than anyone around him expected, more than his own schedule probably should have allowed. And that's not the behavior of idle curiosity. That's recognition. That's someone seeing a pattern they know intimately from the inside, because they lived it themselves decades earlier. The comparisons that circulated from that period aren't casual, offhand remarks people toss around to be nice. They're specifically about accuracy under real pressure, about a mind that reads the floor a full step ahead of where the ball currently is, a skill so few players ever fully develop, no matter how many hours they log in the gym. Then there's Shaquille O'Neal, and his shift in this story might be the single most unexpected piece of the entire narrative, precisely because of where he publicly stood before it happened. He'd spent real, visible time supporting Angel Reese specifically, championing her game on air, in interviews, across multiple platforms. That wasn't hidden or subtle. So when, on a live broadcast, he reportedly paused mid-sentence and said something close to, "I'm not analyzing right now. I'm just a fan," that wasn't a small moment. That was a man publicly admitting, in real time, that something had pulled him in that he hadn't planned on. That's not strategy talk. That's not a balanced analyst carefully weighing two players against each other for television. That's someone admitting they got won over, almost against their own expectations. And what reportedly won him over wasn't the highlight reel stuff. It was decision-making. Watching someone consistently make the correct read, possession after possession, quarter after quarter, night after night, with a consistency that becomes its own kind of statement. Coming from someone who dominated an entire era of basketball through raw power and physical instinct more than cerebral precision, naming judgment specifically as the thing that impressed him most says a great deal about what he was actually watching on those nights. Here's what makes all of this louder, collectively, than any single opinion could ever be on its own. Three completely different legends, from three completely different eras of the sport, with three completely different playing styles and three completely different public personas, are reportedly circling the same conclusion through three entirely different lenses. Jordan sees presence. Bird sees intelligence. Shaq sees decision-making. Three different words, three different vocabularies, shaped by three different careers, but they're pointing at the same underlying thing. That kind of convergence, from people who have no obligation to agree with each other on anything, doesn't happen by accident. It happens when something genuinely real is there to be seen, regardless of which angle you're seeing it from. And it's not only the retired legends circling this. Current players, people still actively competing at the highest level, are being pulled into this same gravity. Tyrese Halliburton knows exactly what it feels like to walk into an arena every single night as the reason people bought their tickets. He knows the specific weight of being the player opponents build their entire defensive game plan around. He's spoken about Clark not as some kind of phenomenon to be observed from a distance, not as a heartwarming story, but as a peer. 2-point guards carrying strikingly similar weight, similar pressure, similar responsibility to lead a franchise and a fan base's expectations every single night. That's not admiration offered from a safe distance. That's recognition from someone doing the exact same job, under the exact same kind of spotlight, who understands the specific cost of it. Analysts covering the league have put this even more plainly, stripping away all the extra language. People want to play with her. That's the whole sentence. No elaboration required, no follow-up needed. In a league where team chemistry is famously fragile, where rosters shift year to year and locker room culture can make or break an entire season regardless of individual talent, that single idea says more than any highlight reel ever could. It means she isn't just filling arenas from the outside. She's someone teammates actively want standing beside them, because of what she brings to a locker room that never once shows up in a box score, direction, trust, a certain baseline standard that raises everyone around her. Sophie Cunningham's arrival in Indiana tells a genuinely different kind of story, but it lands with just as much weight, maybe more, once you understand the context underneath it. She wasn't brought in to be the headline. Nobody expected her to be. She was brought in to be the anchor, the stabilizing presence in a locker room that was suddenly experiencing more pressure and more scrutiny than it had ever known before. Her path, through college at Missouri, into the league with Phoenix, overseas during off-seasons for years just to make the financial math work, gave her something that genuinely cannot be taught in a practice facility. A real, lived, bone-deep understanding of exactly what this league has historically cost the players who never got anywhere near this level of spotlight. There's a specific moment from this past June that everyone who watched it still talks about, months later. Clark took a hard, arguably unnecessary foul in the middle of a heated game. Before the referee's whistle had even finished its full sound, Sophie was already moving, crossing the entire court with no hesitation whatsoever, no visible calculation about how it would look on camera or what the fallout might be. She got there first, before teammates, before coaches. She got there first. Some people, watching from a distance without context, called it drama, called it unnecessary, called it a headline-chasing moment. They missed the point completely. That wasn't conflict for its own sake. That was a statement delivered without a single prepared word. This team protects its own, and she intends to be the one who proves that, in real time, in front of everyone, every single time it's tested. That's really the thread tying both of their individual stories together underneath everything else. It was never just about raw stats or commercial marketability, even though both of those things are genuinely significant parts of this story. It's about what actually shows up when the pressure gets heaviest, and the easiest, safest thing to do would be to stay quiet and let someone else handle it. For Clark, one of the defining tests of her early career wasn't even a game at all. It was an absence, her name missing entirely from the 2024 Olympic roster, after a college season that had already rewritten attendance records and shattered television numbers across the entire sport, not just within it. The reaction from fans, from media, from casual observers who'd only recently started paying attention to women's basketball was immediate and loud, filling timelines and sports radio segments for days. What Clark herself did in response was almost the exact opposite of loud. No press conference called, no lengthy statement drafted and released, no carefully worded interview to manage the narrative on her own terms. She used the space that decision unexpectedly created for her, and she put every bit of it straight back into work, away from cameras. People who watched her closely during that specific stretch, Dwight Howard among them, by several accounts, reportedly said they expected her to use the omission as fuel rather than let it calcify into a wall in front of her. That's not a small or generic prediction to make about someone. That requires actually understanding something specific and particular about how a competitor is built underneath the surface, understanding the difference between someone who breaks under public disappointment and someone who quietly converts it into something else entirely. The criticism swirling around that entire period didn't stop with just the roster decision, either. Former NBA guard Jeff Teague was notably blunt in his public comments about how the league handled her rookie season as a whole, arguing that the on-court treatment she received throughout those months didn't really resemble a league simply welcoming an exciting new star into the fold. It looked, in his reading of it, more like a sustained test, a system checking, night after night, whether she would eventually crack under sustained pressure. Hall of Fame player Rick Barry, who played through one of the most physically punishing eras the sport has ever seen, an era with a much higher threshold for what counted as normal physical play, reportedly said that some of what he was watching crossed a line into something that felt personal rather than competitive. That's not a small claim coming from someone with his specific frame of reference. Her response to all of it, across that entire stretch, was remarkably consistent. Not extended interviews explaining her side, not public complaints about specific players or specific plays, just performance, night after night, letting the results speak in a language that didn't require any additional commentary from her. Sophie's defining moments during this same period came from a much quieter place, generally speaking, but they cut just as sharply when they happened. After a genuinely rough loss in June of 2025, she stood at the podium afterward, eyes steady, voice not wavering even slightly, and essentially asked her own team, out loud, in front of reporters, why they weren't competing with any real consistency. It wasn't framed as a rhetorical question for effect. It was a direct demand for accountability, starting with herself first, before it extended to anyone else in that room. When Clark missed a preseason game entirely, Sophie stepped straight into that gap without being asked to, and made the free throws that ultimately forced overtime, then walked off without asking for a single ounce of credit for having done it. After one particularly ugly shooting performance as a team, she told reporters afterward, plainly and without hedging, that they owed their fans better than what they'd just put on the floor. There was no script behind that sentence, just the truth, said out loud, in real time, to a room full of people with recorders running. Clark's rookie season, taken as a whole, didn't just generate noise across sports media. It fundamentally rewrote the business model sitting underneath the entire league structure. Regular season games consistently drawing over 1 million television viewers, numbers the league hadn't seen with any real regularity before. Arenas that had genuinely struggled for years just to fill half their seats, suddenly turning fans away at the door on a regular basis. Sponsorship conversations that had historically stalled out at modest regional deals suddenly opening up into national partnerships with major household brand names, seemingly overnight. The Fever's decision to select her first overall in the 2024 draft didn't just change the fortunes of one single franchise. It sent a genuine shock through the league's entire financial infrastructure, moving faster than the people actually running that infrastructure had realistically prepared for. But here's what a significant amount of the coverage around Clark's marketability tends to completely miss or gloss over. The person standing right next to her in that locker room every single day, who has actually lived through the earlier version of this league before any of that new money started showing up. Sophie Cunningham built her entire career during the years when marketing budgets across the league were genuinely thin, when media coverage was wildly inconsistent from market to market, when players routinely had to spend their off-seasons playing overseas just to make their annual finances work at all. She knows, firsthand, exactly what this league looks and feels like on the ordinary days when no cameras are rolling and no sponsorship checks are arriving. That lived history isn't background noise to what she brings to this specific team. It's arguably the entire point of why her presence matters as much as it does. Because the transformation that Clark's arrival has triggered across the league, the new television deals, the new national sponsorships, the sudden and dramatic cultural visibility, creates a genuine opportunity, a real window. And opportunities of that scale need people standing inside them who actually understand what lasting, structural change requires in practice, so that the moment doesn't simply pass through the league without leaving anything durable behind it once the initial excitement settles. Better pay across full rosters, not just for the biggest stars. Safer working conditions. Real, functioning career support structures for players up and down every roster, not only the ones landing magazine covers. Cunningham has lived those specific problems directly, for years, without a platform large enough to fix them on her own. Clark now has a platform large enough to actually move the needle on them in a way that wasn't previously possible. Together, that's a combination the league has arguably never had in quite this configuration before: star-level cultural influence paired directly with veteran-level understanding of exactly what needs fixing underneath the surface. Magic Johnson has publicly compared this current stretch of the sport to the Bird Magic era from his own playing days, describing it as a genuine inflection point, the specific kind of moment where an entire sport's long-term trajectory bends and doesn't bend back to where it was before. That's not an exaggeration invented out of nothing for effect. The attendance figures and viewership numbers from this period back up that framing on their own, independent of anyone's opinion about it. Steph Curry, who understands better than almost anyone currently living what it actually means to reshape an entire sport through the quality of decision-making rather than raw physical dominance, has pointed to something equally specific in his own comments. That what genuinely separates Clark from other talented players isn't the viral clips that get shared endlessly online, and it isn't the deep shooting range that gets clipped into highlight reels every other night. It's her control of the game itself as it's actually being played, her command of tempo, of spacing, of the half-second decisions that never make a highlight reel but decide games anyway. Coming from someone who fundamentally changed what people believed a basketball player could even look like on a basketball court, that specific observation carries real, substantial weight. But underneath all of this rising attention, underneath the legends speaking up and the viewership numbers climbing and the sponsorship deals multiplying, there's something else quietly building at the same time. Something the applause doesn't fully cover, no matter how loud it gets. And it's worth looking at that directly and honestly, because understanding what's underneath the surface is the only real way to understand what's actually at stake. For both of these women individually, and for the entire league, they're actively reshaping, in real time, whether the league is fully ready for it or not.